Kenya's GDP for the first quarter has risen by 4.9% compared to 4.3% during the same quarter of last year. We cross now to Nairobi, where James Dry, MD of Dry Associates, is standing by to unpack some of that data. Thanks so much, James, for joining us this afternoon. Let's start off at the top. We've seen, those growth figures coming in. Your overall interpretation of that report that's come through, where we had earlier this week rising inflation really triggering some concern. James, can you hear us on that end?
Yes, you've just come back on, Alishia. Good.
Let's try that again. We've seen this report being released when it comes to the economic outlook for Kenya and its performance for Q1. Of course, we had inflation numbers earlier this week trigger some concern on where the economy is headed. Your overall impressions of the performance Kenya's put on in the first quarter?
Yeah, we're kicking over. We're seeing improvement every year since every year. In 2008, I think GDP was running about 2%, and then next year 3 and 4, and maybe we'll hit 5% this year. So we're kicking over, but we've got a headwind here now with some inflation. Inflation this month, June, is running at about 14.5%. Which is fairly steep. We're importing it through the back door through higher prices for petrol and grain. We're also running a deficit, a national budget here. So we've got some headwind to work through, but overall, we're seeing improvement here, Alishia.
One of the challenges being posed to reining in that inflation rate is the weaker shilling. What's your position on the kind of weakness that's filtered through on the currency and the kind of effect it's having on the economy?
You said what is the effect that the weaker shilling is having on the economy?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the effect of the weaker shilling, of course, is that we're importing a lot of inflation. Everything is costing a great deal more. So what we're going to have to do is, I suspect the central bank is going to have to raise interest rates to strengthen the value of the shilling. And of course, that will make imports a bit cheaper. But monetary policy, of course, is a pretty blunt instrument, and by raising interest rates, we're going to be reducing GDP. I mean, it has a negative effect on GDP in general, and tends to raise unemployment. Especially
where there are always two sides of the coin to consider, and in this instance, right. From a weaker shilling, you get exporters enjoying some benefit. So you've got your big sectors like agriculture and tourism really seeing the upside of where the shilling's at this stage.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And in this quarter, you've seen tourism come back. But I think. We do have a dichotomy here right across the economy. We've implemented a new institution. We're seeing some very good political appointments coming on, and yet at the same time we're seeing foreigners pulling out of the stock market to some extent. I suspect they're anticipating the August elections. So there's this dichotomy. But when you get inflation at 14.5%, that's the primary concern. We're going to have to bring that down fairly quickly.
What about sectors and major revenue earning sectors of the economy starting to come up with more innovative ways to mitigate against risk? And let's use the agricultural sector as a case in point here, because it's been hard hit on the back of the fact that obviously there's weather patterns to consider, but on the other hand, those rising energy costs as well, and a reliance on hydropower specifically.
Right. Energy costs are a big factor in our economy here, of course, and we have no control over the cost of energy. We are looking for alternative sources of energy to reduce our reliance on petroleum-based or fossil fuels. But yeah, these costs are increasing dramatically. with a weak shilling. But you know, looking at the economy in general, we've seen a development of certain sectors. The tourism, of course, is one. IT is one of the sectors that was targeted in the 2030 vision statement. So these things are bringing us closer and closer into the world. We're getting more and more integrated. And as I say, in three years, we've risen from a GDP of 2% to 3 to 4 and maybe 5% this year. So we're doing some things well. But we were affected to some extent by the global financial crisis, and we've gotten into some deficit spending that needs to be brought back under control. But there are sectors of the economy that are certainly showing life.